Grolo here. We are back for round 2 on the Star Citizen Live Tech Talk with Benoit. This is day 2 for me. The first day, we covered the first hour of this, which Jared dubbed the Year of Stability section of the video. I don't know what's next. We're going to take a look right now and figure that out. If you did not watch the first video that I did and you want to go back and watch that first, it'll be linked below, and all of these videos will eventually be part of a playlist, so you can just use that to navigate between them. But I don't know if we're going to get through the whole 2 hours right now. We'll see how it goes. It depends on how much I have to say. It could be that we do the rest of it right now. It could be that I break this into part 2 and part 3. We'll see. With that out of the way, let's dig in.
In case you're like, why would they talk about that? Whatever. We're getting there. We're getting there. Part 2, server meshing. Server meshing,
right.
Past, present, future, static, dynamic, 3D. Benoit, I'm just gonna go get a Coke and a Cinnabon. I'll be back. No, talk to me about server meshing, man.
Well, so obviously we launched server meshing end of last year, and we've been running a server mesh environment for now 7 months, 8 months, right? 9 months. We're not month 9 already. And so that's the static server mesh. And so that means we have territories. Just a quick recap for everybody. And so that means that we have a configuration for these territories, and we can pick different top-level object containers from the tree of the universe, and then we basically distribute them on different, resource servers. So at the moment, we run at a 10 game server per shard setup, and so that means that we basically distribute the key areas, on these 10 game servers, and that's how when you transition from one zone to another, it's seamless, but you're moving from one server to the other. So we've been kind of taking the year to get used to being in a server mesh environment, and so that means we've discovered a bunch of gameplay bugs related to this. I think we talked about some of those in January, but that have been solved. But for example, the quantum drive systems, didn't properly handle the transition. Sometimes we'd lose power in transition, and then that would cause the thing to reset, pull you out of quantum, things like that. That's one example, but there's a series of other issues.
Sometimes your quantum fuel would vanish.
But more importantly, we've been also learning about how to properly distribute the load of the simulation. So now we have this tool, we have this map. It's not the end of it right now. Every patch this year, we've changed the configuration. I don't think we've had a single static configuration since the beginning of the year. Every patch has been different. And so obviously we've tried to make sure that we dedicate resources to where there's an event, right? So if it's a SD location or Hathor locations or Stormageddon locations, we've kind of reconfigured the mesh at each release to basically guarantee some server power at each places, because we know that people congregate in these areas. We've also learned a couple of things, like because the teams that make content don't necessarily always talk to the team that make the tech, right? And so so where you put those locations or how many there are is important, right? And so that we kind of learned that through the Hathor moments where like they were a bit too close and we couldn't distribute them properly because of other limitations, which I'll get into in a bit. And so we've changed that config every time, and so it's been really a good learning experience for the team. We've also solved a bunch of issues in the static mesh related to performance. And so we've talked about this before, but the hybrid, we talked about stability of game servers right earlier, but the hybrid is at the center of this. This is the networking component that you're connected to when you're playing the game. He's doing the replication, he's doing the binding and all that stuff, right? And for this guy, the stability score is 0. Meaning, if there's one crash, we don't ship the patch, right? That's it, right? That thing needs to run perfectly at all times.
Yeah.
And the kind of quality metrics that we expect from the hybrid are very, very intense. Like the speed at which they transfer packets or accumulate packets and transfer it, and between areas and elements has to be very, very, very fast at all times, or else.
Just to let you know, I keep looking down because I'm taking some notes here. He's going through a lot of stuff very quickly, and I want to be able to summarize /recap/talk about this. So bear with me. It's coming. I'm just collecting my thoughts and taking some notes based on what he's saying here.
Also, you get rubber banding, you get desync, things like that. And so there's been a lot of performance improvements behind the scene, especially I think just before Stormageddon, or is it after? At this point, it's a bit of a blur. But I know that we found a couple of key optimizations that have really helped the hybrid maintain stability across some of the big binds that we were seeing. Again, binding is this process that when your client needs to bind to an area, it means he's receiving updates for an area.
Right.
This whole binding up process is a bit costly on the hybrid, especially when there's big areas being bound. And so optimizations have gone into that, and that has helped desync quite a bit. I mean, there's always room there to improve for improvement, and the team are still actively working on this. That's never going to be the end of it. But it's much improved since the release of 4.0. Like I hope the rubber banding is getting a lot better every patch. Like we're hoping to, always cut some of those big bottlenecks across as we go.
Okay.
So that's static server mesh. We also learned a couple of things on how to distribute those locations. So the cost of a location, right, and the amount of players, is not necessarily the same weight. Funny enough, a lot of players in the same place. Let's say you have an empty room, right, with nothing in it, and I can pack 300 players there. No problem. Server's good, right? No problem. If I add AI in there, we start getting into issues, right? If I add ships in there, bigger issues. So that if you want the cost of the location and the multiplied, not necessarily multiplied, but factored in by the number of players there, is what kind of is the cost of an area, and how we should distribute we should distribute the computing power that we pay for to run the game. And so we've been learning a lot about this in all these experiments we've been doing, and that's informing dynamic server meshing, right? Meaning what the algorithm needs to be in order to properly distribute the load of the simulation to the different components in the game that can do the replication.
This weird equation. This is in all the factors of, all right, obviously how many players are there? Sure. What is the resource footprint of the location itself? Correct. Obviously. How many ships are present? Because it's not all ships are created equal. Our process of making ships have changed over the years. Some ships are more efficient than others. So it's okay. What's the resource footprint of the ships in the area? What's the resource footprint of the location itself? What's the resource footprint of the people in the area? And then where's the next closest area? Because with Onyx facilities, we distributed 100 of them and went up. But like you mentioned with Align and Mine, our one of our big learnings, we'll say learnings. It's a nicer word than mistake. Was positioning was where we put them and whatever. We weren't able to separate them into the shards that we wanted to. So being at one and being at the other one just doubled up the performance hit. Somebody in chat said it seems like everything CIG does is a test. Yes, I think that was Flymo Ninja, if I remember. Flymo Ninja. Hey man, yes, everything we do is a test. We're learning. There's a reason I used to end these shows with "What did we learn this week?" Don't ever think that no aspect of game development isn't intricately tied up with the process of learning. Not for us, for you, for everybody. It's like this. So yeah, we are learning as we do this, and that's what Benoit's talking about it. So
that's software in general. That's not just gaming. Software development in general is testing. A lot of testing. There's a reason we use test-driven development in the industry. We make a lot of assumptions, but until you've proven your implementation through testing and validation and whatever, it doesn't really amount to much of anything. And so, yeah, of course they're going to be testing. Now, they said a lot in these first couple minutes today about static meshing. They're just starting to touch on dynamic meshing. Let's just draw a really quick picture here so that we're all on the same page. So he mentioned a lot of things. He mentioned top level containers. He mentioned territories. He mentioned, resources and allocating compute based on need and load and those types of things. He mentioned hybrid, which we'll probably get into later as we talk about dynamic. But first of all, I just wanted to talk about containers for anybody who's not familiar with what these things are. Containers in Star Citizen are things that contain other entities, right? And so you can think of this a bit as like an onion, where like your outermost container is the universe itself, right? And inside that container, you have Stanton and Pyro. And I don't know if exactly this is the container structure, but this is probably close and a good way to think about it. Now, inside Stanton, you have Hurston. And sorry, my whiteboard software just updated this morning and it is bugging out and annoying me. Talk about bugs, right? Star Citizen's not alone. My whiteboard app ships an update, and now I think the palm rest is busted or something, so I'm at the mercy of another update. Anyway, so you'll have Hurston. My writing is going to be worse because I can't rest my palm on my screen. And you'll have, Microtech. And then you'll have the planets over in Pyro. Those will be containers. And then within, it won't just be the planets. It'll be the planetary systems. Could be like the next container, right? So it's not just the planets, it's the moons and so forth. And then within that container, you'll have a container for Hurston and each of its moons, and then within like the Hurston container, maybe you have a container for Lorville, and eventually you'll get down to containers around rooms, players, ships, whatever. Now, them saying that they now have the ability to do territories and that they are managing a configuration of these territories is a way for them to assign compute, which is servers. DGSs is another way of saying that, the dynamic or the dedicated game servers. So they can use their configuration to map these compute resources to territories or to containers, right? So you have over here, you have, they said 10, right? So you have 3, 4, you have 10 DGSs serving a shard, a universe shard in Star Citizen today. And then you'll have a config file, right? Man. If anybody knows how to fix this bug in concepts, let me know. So you have a config file, and it'll say, server 1 is serving the universe. Server 2 is serving Hurston. And so on and so forth. And so whenever I, as a player, traverse from empty space, right? Maybe I'm transiting between Microtech and Hurston, and maybe there's a DGS assigned to Microtech. And as I leave the Microtech solar system, I leave the governance of that server. Say that's server 3 as Microtech. I leave the governance of that server. I'm not yet to Hurston, so where am I? Well, I roll up to the next container. So this server 1 is servicing the whole universe. So anything that is not assigned to a more explicit game server, like Hurston or Microtech, is now being handled by kind of the fallback or the default container server, which would be server 1. So as I leave Microtech, I temporarily enter the governance of server 1, which is servicing the entire universe. And then as I approach Hurston, I re-enter the governance of server 2, because server 2 is the one servicing the Hurston solar system, and so forth. And so that's the ability that static server meshing gives them today, right? They can manually configure these things. And they mentioned, they're trying to anticipate load. So whenever they launch these new events like Hathor or Stormbringer or whatever event they're launching, they're aware of where players are going to be congregating. So maybe, they said they have 10 servers today. Maybe 6 of those servers are kind of generalized. They have a Universe server, a Stanton server, a Pyro server, one for Hearst and one for Microtech, one for whatever. But maybe 2 to 3 or 4 of these 10 servers are being allocated towards these new events that they're launching to try to get these new events to run as smoothly and as efficient as possible. Not always successfully because there are issues, of course, as we know, freight elevators issues and what have you. But so maybe like whenever Hathor launched, they might take 2 of these game servers and assign them to the 2 Hathor locations. And Jared even said that there were some learnings around the Hathor event because they had 2 Hathor locations per planet, right? But it sounds to me like maybe that wasn't enough distance with the static server meshing that they could effectively assign a server to each of those locations. It sounds to me they've got themselves into a position where they maybe had one server servicing both Hathor locations on a given planet or a given moon, and they wish they had maybe separated these things a little further so that they could more effectively boundary the territories, as they called them, and assign DGSs to each one. Now, we know that as we approach dynamic, the goal here is to be able to get far more fine-grained boundaries and be able to get these kind of bubbles of governance that the servers are going to be responsible for, much smaller, as Benoit pointed out. Maybe you have just a small room of 300 people and you want a server dedicated to that room. Like, that's the goal line. I don't know if the static configuration that they have today supports them getting kind of that fine-grained, but it sounds like not. It sounds like they're approaching that. So anyway, I hope this helps just kind of give a picture and some context in your mind as we progress in this conversation. So let's get back to the video.
Dynamic server meshing tomorrow, next week? What you got?
So no, well, I'm not going to advance a date, but I can tell you that there's multiple things that compose dynamic server meshing, right? Obviously, the team is working on those aspects right now, right? The key aspects that dynamic server meshing will bring is a kind of arbitrary subdivision, right? Meaning that we could assign a server to anything that's a streaming group. So inside this big tree, right? You've seen the PES discussions where we show how kind of the data is laid out in one big giant scene tree. Any of those nodes that are deemed a streaming group can actually have a server actually having authority over that entire area. And so DSM will definitely bring us the ability to kind of arbitrarily subdivide, where we're no longer tied to these territories or this territory map. That's the first big thing we're gonna gain from dynamic server meshing, and we're working on that part at the moment, right? Which is basically
okay. So that just validates what we were just saying. Like with the static server meshing that we have today, we do not have, or they do not have, the ability to kind of shrink the area of governance as small as the end goal is, right? So that's the territory map. That's the difference. But so okay, now I'm getting this. So you have the containers and you have a territory map, and the territory map is what they are capable of assigning the static servers to today. So they have kind of predefined areas in which servers can be assigned, and the goal is arbitrary subdivision. So getting rid of this territory map that they're calling it, and just having the ability to assign a game server to an arbitrary area of space of an arbitrary size, which is what we've been talking about quite a bit on this channel. Kind of a lot of our technical talks on this channel have assumed that that's where we are at whenever we talk about meshing and dynamic meshing and that kind of thing, but still a work in progress.
How we can move these streaming groups from one server to the other, how authorities transferred, who's managing it, what component is taking care of that. So that's under development right now. There's also a lot of I want to say parallels or similarities between dynamic server meshing and instancing, right? And so we've talked about that we're working on instancing. That's also part of this work, right? And so
Interesting.
we technically already have the mechanics of instancing in the game in the form of the instance hangers,
right?
Which basically allows you to have multiple stacked areas on top of each other, but you get to see only one, and only one of them is bound to your client and replicate.
Most of the time. I don't know about you, but I often see other people's ships in my instance hangar. It kind of weirds me out.
To your client. Historically, if we go back in the 3x days when we put this in, initially the instancing was actually not working from the networking side, and so you would replicate all the hangars that were at that location, even though you couldn't see it, which was even worse. Now you actually get assigned the proper tag on your character, and so when you actually take the elevator, it's bringing you to an actual instance, which is basically yours. So the instance tech that we're building on top of that will.
I wonder if he's talking about a branch that is not in the main line yet, because I still see other people's stuff in my hangars from time to time, which makes me think that that data is being streamed to my client, and my client's not filtering it out properly. If anybody knows, I'd love a comment.
We'll basically leverage some of the concepts we're putting into dynamic server meshing, because we want to be able to distribute those instances across the mesh, right? And so right now they're location bound, right? But we want to not be able to just have them location bound, but have any of the servers take those off so that we can share the load. Again, optimizing the distribution of the simulation of the computing workload that we have across what players are doing. And so that when you enter an instance, we can guarantee a certain level of performance without needing to have a little, dude at the back going like, oh, we need to change the territory map for this, right? Basically. And so we're actively working on all this stuff right now to bring us to the dynamic part of server meshing. And obviously, with that, even though this is not our focus right now, right? We are still planning to go to higher player counts, but this is totally not our priority right now. Our priority is really on getting the functionality and the computing workload properly distributed automatically. Exactly.
That kind of goes hand in hand, though. Like the ability to efficiently divide the workload up among more and more game servers or workers will naturally give you the ability to scale to more players. So that's the correct priority.
I'm glad you say we're not. That's not our focus at the moment. I talked earlier in the show about us sometimes acting like we invented the wheel when it's one of those things that other people, other games have had and stuff like this.
In this case, they are inventing the wheel. Let's just be clear about that. There is no other game on the market doing this stuff, and I don't care how many of you say, "Oh, but no."
Lots of games have some version of server meshing.
Yeah.
Famously, what's the other one? The Dune game, whose name escapes me at the moment. They did a big thing on their version. Awakening. They did a big thing on their version
Dune game
of server meshing and stuff.
Dune is entirely static. Lots of games have had. So let me just correct what I just said. Lots of games have had static server meshing. I'm not aware of any game that comes close to the vision of dynamic.
How is ours different than what other things? I'm going to give you a hint. 3D. How is ours different from what you're seeing in every other game? Just because I see this come up. I see. I watch the YouTubes and the Twitches sometimes.
Well, first of all, scale is one way this is going to be different. I'm not aware of any game that combines a container system with resource allocation such that you can have compute responsible for simulation in a nested manner, so that like if I fall out the bounds of this area that this server is responsible, I kind of bubble up to something responsible for the larger area around that. right? It's kind of like you have the capability of a server being responsible for this entire solar system, but then if I go to this specific location, I can offload that to another dedicated server. I'm not aware of any game in history that has done that. If you are, let me know in the comments.
And I see people like, they keep acting like server meshing. They fucking invented it and whatever. Oh, there's my one swear. Okay. Sorry, Tyler. Why is our server meshing different?
Well, so you're right. Like, it's not like server meshing isn't already like a thing, right? Like in the past, like even, Ultima Online had a server like transitions. Right now, they were not necessarily seamless, but you still had server transitions and gridding, right? Which is a typical approach, which is you take the world, you split into a grid, and then you have servers.
Gridding is very typical.
This
is what Ashes is doing.
And then the rest of the different strategies come from how the servers communicate to each other, right? And how the state is distributed and how you transition from one to the other. And I think that the areas where our approach differs is that we've extracted the simulation from the game and the replication of the game. So replication is how game server and client stay in sync, right? And so when you're in an area and someone opens the door opens on your client. That's because it's been opened on the server, and it's also because somebody else had authority to send that message to open the door. So this is all replication, right? Well, normally you have one game server and he does both replication and simulation, right? So we've taken the Star Engine, we've extracted the networking from it, so the replication into the hybrid. Now we call him the hybrid now because it's a first stage of server meshing, right? But the hybrid has all the networking components. He has the state in his memory. He holds all of the information for the shard, and he does the replication. So you're connected as a client to the hybrid. So you're not connected to the different servers you're actually on. The game server you're actually that's simulating your area is actually, you're not even on it. You're not even an active connection with that server. You're actively connected to the hybrid. And
eventually that hybrid becomes a replicant, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
The game servers are actually clients with authority, if you want, right? If we simplify. And so that's one area where it differs. The second one is how we separate space, right? And you alluded to it, which is that our territory mappings or mappings to how the authority is managed is in 3D space. So it's not a grid. It's fully made in 3D space. And so that means that we can have, it's 3D space and a tree, right? So which is the other bit. And so what that means is that, just by taking I'm going to try to make that simple. Let's say I'm on the yellow.
It's that tree of containers and 3D space. That's what we were just saying.
Yellow server, right? And suddenly the yellow server, there's not enough players there, and the location is a bit low cost. Then we might want to despawn that server. Well, we can transfer the authority from everything the yellow server is doing to its parent. There is a parent, right? Whereas when you're doing gridding, that's a bit of a different model. In the past, I've seen solutions for meshing which include servers, like adjacent servers talking to each other, for example, things like that. The client actually disconnecting from one server, connecting to the next, right? Which in all of these cases, these were things that created side effects that we didn't want. So in the past, we did try these things. Like if I go way back when we started the server meshing projects, that was the first approach, was like a bit more classical, but we realized to properly offer what we've shown in, for example, the meshing demo Paul did a couple of years ago, or what you're actually playing now on live, to be able to have like bullets completely traverse.
Right.
Yeah, it's this parent-child relationship of responsibility, which is new and interesting in Star Citizen. I'll break out the whiteboard one more time because I didn't do this justice in my last drawing, but I think it'll help as we progress in this conversation. But if we have, let's just focus on Stanton. We have the Stanton game. We have a DGS assigned to running all of Stanton. Right. So anywhere you are in Stanton, you are on this game server. Until you break this down and you say, there's a DGS. Whoops, I'm covering this up. there's a DGS assigned to the Arc Corp system. And there's a DGS assigned to the Hurston system. This is what's new in the approach that CIG is taking. I am not aware of any other game on the market that has this parent-child relationship, so that if Grolo is in somewhere in the ArcCorp system, I'm on this DGS. And as soon as I leave ArcCorp, say I'm flying this way, I've left the boundary of responsibility of this DGS. I have now moved to this DGS because it's the parent of the one that I just left. All right, so the handoff just goes to the parent. And if I continue on my journey to the Hurston system, now Grolo is in the Hurston system, I have now moved the responsibility of computing my environment has now moved to the Hurston DGS. Like, that's what's new about this approach. Most games, like Ashes or whatever, they grid the world, right? Like, actually, let's do it this way. You have some interesting landmass here with some water, some other interesting landmass, and instead of like some kind of a parent-child system, they will grid this. This is exactly what Ashes is doing, and World of Warcraft, and any number of other games. And so that, you know, there is up to a server per grid. So each grid has a server, and he was mentioning that Star Citizen took an approach similar to this early on. I wasn't around for that, but so now as I'm walking across the world and I cross this line, I've transitioned from this server over to this server, and that's how it works. There's no parent. There's only borders and a handoff as you cross those borders. And if you play Ashes Creation today, you are very aware of where these borders are because it is jank AF. All right. Hopefully it improves over time. So that's a really interesting difference and evolution of this meshing technology that, when I say Star Citizen is breaking new ground here and they are inventing the wheel, this is why. All right. Sorry, back to the video.
The transition and hit on the other side of it, like we needed to have a solution that was native to all how we were doing it. The bet behind it was that the hybrid was going to be fast enough, and so far it seems like it's working out, though it is a lot of work to get it, you know, to keep it at that speed with all the needs that we have. So that's I would say was the differences in the approach. And every game is going to have its own approach, right? Tailor-made to its gameplay, right? So it's, in our case, you know, we're trying to make the biggest universe ever, and so we need the most scalable way to approach it. Also,
100%, and we've talked about this. If you go way back to some of my real early videos talking about server meshing, you know, I have entire videos on just this topic. I said the exact same thing in those videos, that like the approach Star Citizen is taking is not the best approach. The approach that Ashes is taking is not the best approach. These approaches are the best approaches for those games. What Ashes is doing works well for the Ashes of Creation game. What Star Citizen is doing works well for the Star Citizen. Like, the demands are completely different. Like, this parent-child relationship and ability to arbitrarily map 3D space, like, that would mean nothing and have almost no value to a game like Ashes of Creation. It has a ton of value to a game like Star Citizen that is operating on this massive scale, right? The gridding system that Ashes is employing is perfectly fine and great for Ashes of Creation. The benefits that CIG's system brings would have little to no value in that world. And I think that's a really important point he just made. I just wanted to double up on that. Also, he keeps mentioning the hybrid. If you're not familiar with the hybrids, there's maybe I'll link it below, but there's an entire road to dynamic meshing floating around out there that does a really good job of breaking down all the various components in the final vision of dynamic server meshing. Once we get there, we have things like the replication layer and replicants, which is like a federated swarm of servers that manage replication across the broad. Like he was saying, this is separate from the game server. So you have the replication layer, of the game server layer, of all these various layers of communication and computation. And right now, many of those layers that should or intended to be separated eventually are all part of one service, which they are calling the hybrid. And I assume they're calling it the hybrid because it's doing multiple jobs, aka hybrid. So, but the intent is to eventually break that into multiple services. And the reason you want to break that out into multiple services is so that you can have more efficient ability to scale each job or role of the hybrid service. Right now, they're scaling it all at once, and I would assume they want more fine-grained control of where the resources go and how they're being applied, and that's why you want to break this thing up.
So we've taken the most difficult route, I feel. But
I think you need to adopt CR hands a bit more. You were doing the thing, and I kept like, no, a little server inside a bigger server. I'm like, you use your CR hands. It would help. This
it's easier to draw
inside this server. So
That's why I did. I find myself using my hands,
get
but
the authority. I'm just over here like, use the CR hands.
Shit. Yeah, I was a missed opportunity.
If only there was a time. If ever there was a time for CR hands.
Yeah. That's true.
All right. So 3D server meshing, and separating everything, so connecting people to the hybrid instead of the server, so that things can connect and carry through from one server to another server seamlessly and stuff. Anything else you want to say on server meshing before we move on?
No, I think that's pretty much the state of it. Like, we're advancing on the dev for it. Obviously, we don't.
This might be something interesting to people too. I totally overlooked that, but they mentioned a few times now about how you're connecting to the hybrid instead of the game server. And in most games, I think everybody probably makes the assumption that you're connecting to the game server. That's how most games work. That's how Ashes of Creation works. You're connecting directly to a game server, right? Like, I hate to keep flipping back to this, but in Ashes of Creation, whenever you log into the game, your PC that you're connecting with is connecting directly to one of those servers, depending on the area that your character is in. And that server is sending you all the information you need for that area. And whenever you transition to another server, your PC basically establishes a new connection to the other server, begins receiving its information from that server, and drops the connection to the one that you transitioned from. And there's a handshake thing that goes on there to hopefully smooth that process out. Again, today it is not smooth. What makes Star Citizen different in this respect as well is, in addition to all this other crazy stuff going on, your PC, does not connect directly to this DGS here. That is not what happens. Instead, there is this, they're calling the hybrid, which someday will be the replication layer that you're connecting directly to or whatever. And the hybrid is communicating with these game servers. So your PC connects to that. The hybrid is communicating with the game servers. Based on the area that you're in, it knows which game server to communicate with to get the results of the computation of the area around you, and it's using that territory map that they were talking about right now. And in the future, it'll be using other services to dynamically determine which game server is responsible for simulating the environment that you're in. I believe the name of that service is Atlas. So this hybrid service, like we mentioned, is doing all of these jobs right now. It's doing the data replication. It's doing the it's doing the dedicated game server discovery, and it's mapping all this for you. But in the future, I believe the intent is that the client connects directly to a replicant within the replication layer, and that replicant is talking to Atlas to determine what game server is running your simulation based on your position, and what the dynamic grid has determined is responsible for the area that you're in. And so, yeah. hopefully that also helps a little bit. And this, by the way, the fact that your client is connecting to the hybrid and eventually the replicant is one of the things powering the recovery that we see now, and why we're not getting the 30Ks anymore, right? Back in the old days, before they broke the DGS out from the hybrid, like they used to be the same thing, and so whenever the game server would fail, you would get a 30K because you would lose your connection. Now, you're connected to a hybrid. If the game server fails, you just get that error screen while the hybrid waits for another game server to replace the one that just failed, right? And so when that game server spins up, the hybrid begins communicating, receiving information again, and it allows you to continue on your journey. Cool.
We don't want to bring in destabilize changes to the game, right? And so we're making sure that these are going to be tested first. We will go to a tech preview when we feel it's the right time. Right now, it's not the right time, and so we're still working on these aspects. But that's our objective: is to we're not going to do a big dynamic server meshing is up, right? That's not going to be how we're going to roll this out.
Right.
We will most likely be bringing elements of meshing into play,
Makes sense.
right? Like the ability to despawn servers in areas that are not being simulated, the ability to scale up the mesh dynamically from the territory map, and then later on possibly go into, then the instancing support that goes through it, and then after that, the final jewel of like dynamic resubdivision and reallocation.
And that makes a ton of sense, because if you think about it, from your perspective and your game client's perspective, there's really no difference between static server meshing and dynamic server meshing, right? You are already connecting to a hybrid, and that hybrid is already determining which game server is responsible for simulating the environment that you are in. We're already there. The only thing we don't have is the fact that the game server responsible for you is a static configuration. So we are missing the piece where things are dynamically recalibrated, but that is all invisible to your client. Like, your client really does not have to change at all for that to happen. So when he says they're planning on rolling this out piecemeal, that makes perfect sense. Like, you're not even going to notice, likely, unless they tell you when some of these pieces come online. Today, if you're in Area 18, your hybrid that you are connected to is always going to the same game server to get simulation information for your client. Tomorrow, or whenever they bring some elements of dynamic server meshing online, that hybrid will be going to different servers, depending on which one has been dynamically allocated to Area 18, right? None of that makes a difference to your client. You're getting the information from the hybrid today, and once dynamic server meshing is online, you're still going to be getting information from the hybrid. You're never going to know the difference. That's the idea and the goal, and how I expect to see this roll out. And the only thing that will change from your client's perspective is today you are connecting to a hybrid, and eventually you will be connecting to a replication layer, a layer that is specifically engineered to get your client the information it needs from a constellation of backend game servers and services. So whenever they break apart the hybrid and they bring the replications layer online, that will be a change to your client. It'll now be connecting to the replication layer. But everything else is invisible. It's on the back end. And your client really need not be aware. Let's continue.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh in the middle of what you're saying. Don't Please in the chat goes, I'm really glad I was here to see Disco's last show. I've survived this long, man. All right. So, part 3.
Big tickets.
Oh, stretch.
Part 3. Man, the
Stretch,
server
part
meshing
3.
part was so short. Man. That's all right. They said a lot. It was a good check-in. It's really great to hear that this work is progressing, and it's great to hear how Benoit thinks about the rollout of this. It jives, it tracks, You know, it's easy to think like, oh man, they're not making any progress on this when the radio is silent. So, but yeah, everything I've heard here makes sense. You know, they kind of glanced over the fact that they are collecting a lot of information that is relevant to dynamic server meshing as part of static server meshing. They're still getting used to working in this multi-server world, right? Like, think about it. For like the first 10, 11 years of this project, they were operating in a one-game server world. It's only for the past 9 to 10 whatever months that we've been operating in a multi-server world. So of course they're skilling up on this. They're learning from this. They are acquiring a lot of information. I'm sure that they are changing how they're gathering statistics and how they're instrumenting their code and collecting their metrics and how they're determining what all this means. And like, you know, these are muscles that they're building. But yeah, and a lot of those learnings are going to carry forward into dynamic server meshing because they are manually going through that process right now. Like, they are anticipating where compute resources will be required, and they're manually creating this territory map of servers and so forth. And so all the learnings of doing that manually are going to feed into the algorithms and the Atlas service and all the things that will eventually automate this, right? And whenever we first see that automation and we see the first vestiges of like automatic server shutdown and spin up and allocation, I'm sure that it will be not correct. It's going to be, there's going to be all kinds of edge cases and wonkiness, and we're going to see some really jank stuff, but it'll be better than it would have been had they not gone through this learning phase, right? And it'll just keep improving over time. And that concludes part 2, which was all about server meshing and dynamic server meshing and so on and so forth. So I'm going to cut this video off here. I look forward to discussing all things dynamic meshing, static meshing, server meshing, gridding, containerization, transiting server border lines. I look forward to talking about all that stuff with you in the comments below. If there was anything that stood out in this chat as wrong or incorrect, or if I misspoke, or if you can think of any examples that I was asking for on things that have done it this way, I would love to hear about it. And I look forward to continuing that conversation in the comments below. I'm going to get right into part 3 of this video, and we will publish all 3 parts as a playlist on YouTube. So, yeah. By the time you're done watching this, part 3 will drop soon after. I think we got like an hour and a half to go. So part 3, it sounds like part 3 is big ticket items. I look forward to digging into that with you next. Should be fun. All right. Until then, Grolo out.